So, okay, here we go. There you go, Peter. I knew it was going to be recorded at the end of that. It's a bit more relaxed, folks. Anyway, this is LAWS12066 Land Law, and this is an extra session, not a required session, just an extra drop-in session. And at the request of your colleagues, the session is being recorded, and I'll put it on the Moodle website. Okay, so we're just talking generally around the law of leases, and just saying, I've just been saying that, you know, there's need to establish what it is that we need to say, yes, we've got a lease, tick that box. There are certain legal requirements, you know, the law requires certain things. There are certain characteristics. I mean, as I mentioned it initially, basically saying what have we got in substance here, not as a matter of, you know, what it looks like or what it's called. And that's not something that's just contained to this topic or this area of the law. As you know, the law focuses on matters of substance, not just matters of form. Okay. Then we need to look at different types of leases, and then we moved on from that to say, well, we need to think about covenants, the sources of covenants, and where you know, and talk about and identify those. And then we've got the issue about transferring of interests, assignment of the reversion by the lessor, assignment of the leasehold interest by the lessee, subleasing by the lessee. How does that impact the rights and obligations in light of the doctrine of privity and the doctrine, the privity of estate and privity of contract? And then we've got remedies, and under remedies, property law remedies, and we've got contract type remedies if you can argue that there is a loss of bargain between the parties, and then you can bring forward this claim for damages, which is the usual common law type remedy that's available. Now, I was just before I started recording, I was just saying that's an enormous amount of material. Know that everybody's aware of that. Right? There's an enormous wealth of case law and what all of that can't possibly be assessed in an exam question. You have to ask yourself, are there features of that landscape that necessarily would usually arise? I think you should be able to say yes. There are some parts of that landscape that you'd ordinarily expect you would need to tackle. But to incorporate a requirement to explore all of the nature, for example, of covenants and all of the nature of assignment, that's just overwhelming. No, I don't think I couldn't possibly. I couldn't possibly give you a question that would necessarily explore all of that. Okay, so you just need to be prepared and have an awareness and an understanding of the critical aspects of that and the relevant law that supports those areas. Know where to find that material, I suppose, in whatever it is you decide to take into the exam room. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's just making sure that you're systematic, working through what you've identified, that you're making sure that there's good legal, you know, amount of law being identified to support the points that you're making, and that you're resolving the issues as you go along. That's very important. Resolve the issues as you go along and keep going back. What was it that the client is asking for? What is the client trying to do here? That should be indicated to you in information, and then focus on the actual task at hand. Right? You'll see that there's like the scenario, and then that's how I tend to set that up. We've seen that in term one. The task is identified there. Sorry, folks, I'm just eating a little bit of pineapple, if that's okay. It's a bit more informal tonight. So any particular questions anyone like to ask?
I have one in relation to social housing.
Oh, so we'll move across from Lisa's for a minute. Okay, that's good. Yep.
I just want to know, in relation to the legislation, should we be taking a copy of all of the legislation that you've put in the key legislation bit on Moodle?
What I would, it's a good question, Shana, thanks for that. I had a question from a student today and I responded to that. Can I just repeat what I said to that student? Right, so I have suggested that, of course, you know, the notes, I think, useful. Queensland Housing Strategy 2017 to 2027, which is on Moodle as a PDF document. The Housing Act 2003, but only, I would suggest, Part 4, capital A, which is dealing with community housing providers. Maybe my article, but I might find that useful. The social housing infographic from the Productivity Commission 2016 report. Now that's just should be able to be printed out just as a one-pager, but it gives you a bit of a snapshot of the sector in 2016, which is helpful. And maybe a few pages from the NCHRS website, which is the National Community Housing Registration System website, and just a couple of pages there about the arrangements nationally, and also there's a hyperlink on that website to Queensland. One further resource you might go to is the Commonwealth website dealing with housing assistance, and that's the I referred to that in my lecture, and I think there's a link on Moodle, just in terms of the current programs of the Commonwealth Government with regard to housing assistance generally, and how that bears in terms of social housing. Okay.
Thank you for that.
Good, very good. Now Simon's asked a question. Just let me read that. All right, yeah, okay. So Simon's asked about the format of the exam. There's an information sheet, Simon, under the welcome page on Moodle. So please have a look at that. But just to reiterate that the exam has two parts, Part A and Part B. Part A has 2 questions and they're policy style questions, and you'll do 1 from 2. You'll only answer 1 from 2, not 2 questions in Part A. Part B is problem solving questions, and there are 2 questions in Part B, and you are required or expected to answer both problem solving questions in Part B. Policy style question in Part A that you'll do is of a higher mark allocation than was the case in the Term 1 unit. And the problem solving questions in Part B are of different mark allocations. And the information indicates that those questions cover the law of leases and easements. And Part A covers Topic 6 on alienation of property and the rule against perpetuities. Topic, no doubt, near and dear to the hearts of many. And Topic 8 on social housing, as Shana has been seeking some further clarification on materials regarding that.
Can I just ask one more question? Sorry.
You can, Please do, ma'am.
It might be a really stupid question, but I have to ask it. The Community Housing Providers National Law, is that just the national regulations that you're talking about? Because it's not a law, it's not legislation, right? It's just a regulation, the national regulation, isn't it?
This is a good question. So it's called the national law, but it is not legislation enacted by the federal parliament. That's quite right. What it actually is it's a framework that has come about as a consequence basically of an agreement between state, territory and federal housing ministers, or the relevant minister that represents a housing portfolio. Some of these are now combined within mega departments and so on. So there might not be a specific designated housing minister, but at the time when the national law, in quotes, was developed, there were actually more specific housing ministers at the time. Right? So basically it was a cooperative agreement that was entered into, and what then occurred as a result of that was that states signed that wanted to follow the national law framework enacted provisions through state legislation. Now, in some states, and not all the states signed up to this, so even though it was called national law, it didn't actually represent the entirety of the Australian landmass in terms of the legal jurisdictions, because not all the states initially signed up to it, and they're still not fully signed up to it in terms of enacting their own domestic legislation. But those that did sign up to it, basically some decided to amend their housing their housing acts. Housing acts were normally about the structure for providing for and the funding of public housing, okay, and maybe some ancillary services. So some, like Queensland amended its Housing Act through Part 4A to incorporate provisions from the national law. Other states, for example, New South Wales, enacted its own separate legislation which mirrored the national law, okay, and it didn't incorporate that into the its Housing Act, so it had enacted separate legislation. So getting back to your original point, Shannon.
Sorry, so New South Wales replaced their whatever they had with another piece of legislation that mirrored the regulations?
No, they didn't replace it. What they did was they still had the Housing Act, which essentially dealt with public housing, right? They introduced or enacted separate legislation that enacted the provisions of the Community Housing National Law. So okay. What they didn't do is they didn't incorporate it into their existing Housing Act.
Yeah, it was just a separate piece.
That Queensland did, but New South Wales went a different way. Okay?
Yeah.
And so this this national law, it actually doesn't have the status of legislation, but it's a national law framework that's come about through a cooperative agreement between housing ministers. But it's referred to as the national law in every document and every source that talks about it. But that's the reality in terms of its status. And then in terms of its legal operation, we need to look to what the various states and territories have done. And of course, in our context, we're concerned about Queensland, right? You might need to think about, what's happened, somewhere else, in terms of that process, and how that might impact upon Queensland or that sort of thing. But thinking about what Queensland's done and the national framework, and maybe as I said, what's happened a bit elsewhere, and whether that's relevant in Queensland or not. And this area is a bit of an amalgam of legal legal frameworks, if you like, we've been talking about, and also policy frameworks. So you've also got policy developments by Queensland and the Commonwealth in terms of what they're going to do about this area of social housing, community housing, affordable housing, and so on. And so that's the range of things that are affecting this space. Okay.
Okay, thank you. I was just like trying to basically work on my answer for the tutorial question to take in there, which cross-references like the relationship with the Community Housing Providers National Law, and then obviously our Housing Act, the amended one, with that. So I was trying to see the, well, basically what they've said and what has been amended, like what has been put into legislation from that framework, and I'm just trying to find the framework.
Well, that's a good point to make as well, because the Queensland Housing Act doesn't actually have that, but you can find it by going on to the website for the National Regulatory System. That's the one. You can also find it by going and having a look, for example, at the New South Wales Community Housing Providers National Law legislation in New South Wales. It has it as one of the schedules to that act. It actually has the national law as a schedule, so you can find it there. Okay, so that's a good point.
Thank you.
Yep. Right. Other questions, folks? We're probably all feeling at our ease at this point, is that right?
Stress to the max.
Stress to the max. Oh dear. Well, look, don't stress too much, folks. And can you guarantee I won't need this? Eve is stressing about computations. Look, let me say this, right? And I think I know where this question is coming from. The topic where there was some mathematical gymnastics, within the rule against perpetuities. Well, that's where we're talking about. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That area is being assessed in Part A. What is Part A about?
Policy questions.
Policy questions. Thank you, Sean. Now, policy questions is not about problem-solving questions, and I know that the question in the last year's exam paper was a problem-solving question about rule against perpetuities. Yes, but the question that you're going to face this year is in that part of the exam that is a policy-style question. Now, having said that, it's always a proviso, isn't it? Having said that, if that's the topic that you're thinking of preparing for Part A, Shana's revealing her hand, and I think her questions were revealing her hand a bit too. But if folks are planning on doing the topic 6 question, right, then you cannot ignore the fact that there is that dimension to it. Right? However, you're not really, it's a policy style question. So it's not about you performing the mathematical or the computation process that you would in a problem solving question around the rule against perpetuities. Okay. But understanding that that's a dimension of that area might also, and being able to sort of reveal that a bit, might be helpful in explaining what the policy issue is about, actually, right? And so, what, in a sense, what is the policy concern, maybe, that stands behind some of that computational gymnastics that has to be done in that area, if I can put it like that. So, I don't think you're going to need to do any computations, right? No NASA level maths required for land law. I can assure you of that. But just being aware of that and appreciating that that's maybe part of what needs to be tackled from a policy perspective, if I can put it like that. And as you know, you've got a substantial review document on the legislation that relates to that area of the course, Property Law Act. We're talking about the Property Law Review 2018. And there's a substantial chunk of that dealing with that aspect. Now, again, all of that isn't needing to be looked at, but go back and have a look at, you know, the sections that we focused on in the legislation, and then see what was said in the review about those sections. And that's what I would be thinking of, you know, that's how I would be thinking of that. Make you feel a little bit more at ease, Eve? Yeah, just a little bit, that's fine. Stick and carrot, stick and carrot.
Can I ask a quick question on
yes,
this one?
Please do.
Reviewing the lecture notes, we've got prescribed reading as to where we might find things of use.
Is that a question, Anthony? Or? Anthony, did you ask a question?
No, I'm sorry, it's gone. I'm sorry. Yes, I'm trying to ask, but I put my paper down on the keyboard and it turned me off, which is a useful piece of kit, actually.
Yeah.
So in the proprietary interest and perpetuity section, you've got prescribed reading.
Yes.
And you've got read LexisNexis Questions and Answers Property Law 3rd edition, Butterworth 2007. NB, this topic is not covered in the PLQ&A. So which bit of LexisNexis Questions and Answers Property Law is relevant to prescribed reading? If any.
I'm a bit... let me...
Because you didn't refer in the notes back to Australian property law, Sackville and Neve, but you did on the Moodle, which and indeed is relevant, but it's not in the study notes. And then I'm just wondering if you might put the wrong book down or something.
I don't, just hang on. Let me. I'll have to pull up something. Just can you bear with me for a moment? So you're looking at the notes for topic 6, is that right?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Just give me a moment and I'll access those.
Paragraph 1.3 on page 1.
Oh, just give me a moment.
I don't want to waste your time with it, but
no.
I can't find anything in the
no waste
question
of time. We will work out what's happening here.
It's sort of there's minor references to it.
Can you give me the page reference again, Anthony, please? It's
page 1 of LAWS12066 Land Law Alien Week 6.
Yeah. Page 1.
Page 1, paragraph 1.4 by 1.3, prescribed reading.
Yes. So I'm looking
Point 2, Cameron LexisNexis Questions and Answers Property Law 3. NB, this topic is not covered.
Oh, okay. Right. So
I just wonder why that line's even there then. I mean, it is. There are little bits,
I
but
think
nothing
probably what's happened there
meaty.
is well spotted. I think what's happened is that there's basically probably been just a little glitch in the printing of that, and then I picked it up, and rather than being able to delete the entry with regard to that secondary source, which we've been using as for some of the questions in the tutorial problems, I've just noted that the topic is not dealt with in that book. That's it. And that's the reason why the questions, there's no questions from the Q&A book for that topic.
No, well, I can see that. But I mean, it is. There's bits in there, but nothing.
Not directly, but not in terms of
meaty.
not in terms of what I wanted us to look at. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Apologies.
Okay, good.
Apologies for the confusion, but thanks for sorting it out.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah. Well, it's my confusion. Doesn't matter to you.
No, I mean, you know, these things, like obviously the notes, for example, are developed much in advance, and sometimes some small items slip through the process. But no, that's well spotted, and thanks for that. Yeah. No, that's right. So the main thing is, with regard to this topic, it's the notes, it's the discussion in the casebook, and it's the relevant parts of the Property Law Review 2018 with regard to reform features and aspects concerning those parts of the framework that we've focused on in regard to what was covered in topic 6. Yep. Right. And Eve is still worrying about numbers. Okay. Okay. I think you actually like numbers, Eve. That's what I think is going on here. I think the truth is you actually are, in reality, a numbers person. That's oh dear. There we go. Okay. Okay. All right. So, folks, any other questions? Anything else you'd like to ask? Very important. You know, I've said this before, but it's probably, you know, just repeated and reiterated. Manage your time in the exam. Okay, very important to manage your time. And decide how much time you're going to spend on each of the questions based around how many marks they're worth. Don't overrun, okay? Because it's important for you to spend the appropriate amount of time on each question and finish the question. Make sure you finish your answer. It's very disheartening for me to see unfinished answers or students saying, I ran out of time. Can't do that, folks. At the end of the day, I mean, obviously it will impact on your outcome in this course or unit. It's mutually disheartening. Okay, acknowledged. But the reality is that, you know, you just can't, you know, I mean, if you're representing a client, you just can't say, oh, just didn't get to that bit, sorry. Well, that doesn't actually work, you know. I mean, in terms of doing what you need to do for your clients. So if you look at it like that, it's not just an academic exercise. That's the difference between studying law and studying something else. Studying something else is, well, you know, you're studying it, you're getting a qualification, whatever. But as lawyers, at the end of the day, we are professionals, we are members of a profession, and we have duties and obligations to the court and to our clients. And we just cannot run out of time. We cannot muck things up like that, okay? So I know that obviously you want to complete the exam for your own purposes and to get the best outcome you can achieve. I understand that. But just if you think about it professionally, you need to make sure that you always cover what you need to cover. And so don't run over. Decide how much time is should be dedicated to a question based on how many marks it's worth, and that's it. Don't run over, okay? So that you give yourself the opportunity to tackle each of the questions that you need to. Give them a fair shake. Make sure you go through the process. Make sure you're systematic, logical. The law is there to support what you're saying, that you're making your points clearly, legibly, so Michael can read the points you're making. It's a handwritten exam. I know, folks, we don't spend many hours of the day writing for 2 hours any longer, but we do in invigilated exams. There you go. And really important to make sure that you conclude the issues, right? Whatever the issues are, conclude the issues and wrap things up, okay? And then what's the advice ultimately to the client? And in the policy question that you choose to tackle, it might be that you're being asked to do something in particular, might be that you're being asked to come up with something in particular, or to speak to a certain audience. You know, make sure that you don't forget about that. Okay, it's not just a descriptive exercise about the relevant law, but if it's set within a particular context, that's for a purpose, and you need to somehow angle your response to that, because that's part of what's required. Okay, so it's important to remember that. And yes, in that second question Shana's posed, yes. So if you find yourself, no, you haven't finished, yes, you move on. You have to be strict with yourself. You have to move on and give yourself a chance to tackle the next question, okay? But try and manage your movement through the question. Keep your eye on that clock or on your watch or whatever, and make sure you're using your own timepiece. Don't necessarily rely on the one sitting on the wall, okay? Make sure your one's accurate.
Michael, how much do we get marked down if we do dot points? As in, like, not like, obviously when we write an assignment, we're very polished, so to speak. We're obviously making points, but we're sort of not just making those direct points. We're, adding in the extra little bit that makes it sound more professional and pretty.
I'm expecting your exams to be very polished too.
Oh, okay.
No. Look. I mean, I'll be serious, right? So, of course, it's more impressive to be writing in sentences and paragraphs, okay? And I want you to aim to do that. But if you find that you're running out of time and there's a few things that you feel you need to get down, you can just, I'm not going to say that I will not read it because there are points there, but the bulk of your answer needs to be a narrative discussion, okay? But I don't want the whole of your answer to be just dot points. But if you're finding that you're running out of time in an answer, getting towards the end, and there's a few more things that you need to get down, yes, you can do that, okay? And I will look at that. But you can understand that that's obviously not as structured or as impressive as a written, constructed argument with sentences and paragraphs. Okay, so but that you can. I will look at that. I won't ignore it just because it's in dot points. Absolutely. Okay. Land law people.
Just, Michael, just a quick question on the referencing. So we've got this case, let's say we're looking at PLOS Farming Estates Proprietary Limited, receivers and managers appointed, and Eastern 2001, 10 BPR, If we just put down
Yes.
Cloth farming, would that be enough, or do you want a little bit more?
Crop farming and eastern.
Cloth farming and eastern.
Crop farming, be eastern in parentheses. There you go. Bang.
Okay.
Nothing else is necessary, people, in an exam. Okay? We do not need citation details in an exam, you know? You don't need to give me the citation detail. I mean, you might, the year, maybe the year, that's all right, I don't mind that. But just give me the case name, okay? It's a good question, Peter, thank you for that. So but very important to see those cases there. Right? I'm not going to see footnote references, I know that in an exam, right? All the cases dropped out to footnotes. I don't know where people get these ideas from, but anyway, I know that I don't get it in an exam. But you need that, very important. The other thing is that referring, obviously, to sections of the key legislation, and again, it's entirely appropriate to adopt an abbreviation, appropriate abbreviation for the key legislation. So Property Law Act, I'm happy for you to call that the PLA in caps, PLA. And the Land Title Act, I'm happy for you to call that in caps LTA, okay? Just so long as it's clear what you're referring to, okay? And just, again, you can put that in parentheses, or if you want to incorporate it into your sentence structure, that's good too, right? Just important to make sure that the law is there and it's integrated into your discussion, not just tacked onto the end, you know, sentence, and then I'll see all these cases and see all these sections. No. It needs to be integrated into your progressive discussion, okay? And showing how the law supports the points you're making, because one of the things that you're going to be doing is you need to show your engagement with the law, which shows your understanding of the law and its application to the facts or the issue and whatever. But that's a progressive thing. It's not just all stacked, you know, tacked onto the end. Okay. Another thing I might just say too is that the policy style question gives you the opportunity to think about the law differently. It gives you the opportunity to think about where the law should be heading. Now, you've got, for both of the topics that are covered in Part A, you've got some policy, variety of policy documents, information, reform documents, reform discussion, debate, and whatever, right? But I want to hear what you think. What's your view about where the law should be heading in a policy sense, or what is the policy conundrum here, and what should we do with this? Okay, and that's why I always refer to those style of questions as policy style questions. I don't call them essay questions. I mean, you can do an essay about anything, but these are questions that are allowing you to explore a theme or a concept that there is issues around something needing to be done with it. There's some reform aspects. There's policy questions and debate. But at the end of the day, what are you saying? What's the point you're trying to make in bringing those materials together, and how are you using the framework of material in terms of what your response to the particular question or the task at hand is? One of the ways to remind me that you're actually focusing on the question is by keep focusing on those key features, key words in the question. You know? Again, it's a response to the particular question. It's not just a general narrative about the area. Okay, just like in the problem-solving questions, it's not just about a general description of the law that relates to that area. If you're not tackling the particular problem at hand, the scenario being presented to you, you're not actually answering the question, and you will not do well. Okay, so Anything else? Or is it all bar the shouting? Can I ask, is land law your first exam, or where does it sit in the sequence for most of you?
Mine's second.
Second, right. Only. Oh, there we go. Get your undivided attention, Nicole. last of the last. There we go. Right. When did the exam period start? There you go. Yes, well, sorry, Shana?
It started this week, didn't it?
I thought it might have, yeah. But maybe people, it's all manner of different things in terms of what people are doing. It's my only invigilated exam. There you go. You know what they say about a land law, don't you? It's where the rubber hits the road.
It started on the 17th.
Oh, right. There we go. There you go. 17th is tomorrow. Well, folks, I think we might call it a night. How does this compare in complexity to property law? Oh, interesting question. How did you find property law exam? I mean, I'm sorry, that's a bit of a loaded question, isn't it? I know there were some issues with erratas and all that stuff carrying on. There's not any of that this time. You did okay. Well, I would expect so too. Set yourself a high bar, Nicole. Look, land law. I'll say this, right? I have to say this, I suppose. Land law is a challenging unit. Okay. I think it's fair to say it's more technical than property law. And when I say, I'm using the descriptors of the actual courses, right? The units, right? Not generally the area, right? I could call the whole thing property law if we like to, right? But in terms of the Term 2 unit and the Term 1 unit. So the Term 2 unit, I think, is more technically demanding than the Term 1 unit. I'd put it like that. And I think the other challenge of land law is there's more legislation, more provisions of the legislation that are involved. You're not really, like, the exam is not really focusing too much on it, the Torrens system as such. We've done that in various ways, but assumed knowledge around the Torrens framework, of course, important. So I'd say it will keep you occupied for the 2 hours, and I think you'll come out of the exam room feeling like you've had a full exam experience, and put it like that. But I always say that I hope, and I think this is my aim. I'm able to achieve this. And I give my students a lot of heads up around, what it is I want, what I'm focusing on, and so on, the strategies. But it's doable, right? I think it's fair to say that I don't set exams that aren't doable, but it will stretch you in different ways, okay, and test you in various ways as it needs to, right, to ensure that you've got good grounding and you're competent in the key areas going forward. Because as we know, people, land law, property law, it's the foundation stone of law and of life. Of course I'd say that, wouldn't I? There you go. Look, all the best, and you just do the best you can on the day. and no one can ask more than that. Okay? And you go in there with a steady state. Don't get stressed. Don't get, overly anxious about everything. Just go in. You will have done your preparation. You will have done the yards that you need to have done in preparing for the exam. You go in, you take it on the terms in which it's offered. You move through it systematically. Choose the questions in part A you're going to do. Tackle the questions in part B. Manage your time appropriately. And there you go. Before you know it, the exam will be done and dusted. And you'll be moving on to your next challenge in life. Now, what's Simon asking? If we have any other questions about the exam or the material that we suggested on between now and Monday, can we contact you? Well, yes, you can. Yes. Friday might be a bit missing in action on Friday, but you can certainly contact me. Yes, you can. I always respond to my students, folks. Always. Because, I know the university says this, it's our motto, isn't it? The students come first. But I always believe that in this situation, you are my primary client group. And so you deserve the attention that I can give you within parameters of what's reasonable, okay? And to do whatever I can to assist the process. So there you go. Good night from me. It's good night from him. Good night. All the best.
Good night, Michael. Thank you.
No, Michael, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.